Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to take a look at something that's probably in your pocket right now, actually, social media.
Yeah, it's become such a big part of our lives, hasn't it?
It really has, and we've got a ton of research and firsthand accounts to sort through today to explore the psychology behind these platforms.
It's fascinating how these platforms tap into our need to connect, you
Yeah,
know, but
yeah,
they almost use it against us
right. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to figure out how they get us hooked, how they're changing society, and what we can do about it.
in what we can do about it.
Yeah,
It's almost scary how effective they are.
right.
How many times have you just picked up your phone to check one thing and ended up scrolling for like an hour?
Way longer than you intended. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. That psychology behind that.
Yeah. Well, how do they play on our brain like that?
Well, one of the key things here is the role of dopamine.
Okay.
That feel-good chemical that our brains release when we experience something pleasurable.
Yeah, like getting a promotion or eating a piece of cake or...
Exactly.
Okay.
But social media platforms have figured out how to trigger those dopamine releases in a way that's very similar to gambling.
Oh, interesting.
So it creates the slot machine effect where every notification, like, or comment becomes a potential reward.
Oh, so every time I get a notification, my brain's getting like a little hit of dopamine, making me want to check my phone again and again.
Precisely. And then you've got this thing called the sociometer.
What's...
The sociometer,
Yeah.
which is basically our brain's way of keeping track of our social standing. You know, how accepted and liked we are by others.
Oh, so like where we fit in the hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I'm guessing social media taps into that too.
Oh, yeah, I would think so.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about the Facebook like button.
Uh-huh.
It's a direct appeal to our sociometer. So each like is like a little validation injection telling us, hey, you're liked. People approve of you.
Oh, so that's what it is.
And that triggers more dopamine, making us want to post more, engage more, and stay on that platform.
It's crazy how these little things are playing on our psychology.
Yeah, it really is.
I'm starting to see social media in a whole new light.
And there's another aspect here that I find super interesting.
Okay, what's that?
Have you ever heard of the Dunbar number?
The Dunbar number, that rings a bell. It has something to do with how many relationships our brains can handle, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the Dunbar number suggests that there's a limit to the number of stable social relationships we can actually maintain, and it's around 150.
150.
Nah.
But I have like 500 Facebook friends.
And that's exactly the point. Platforms like Facebook push us past that limit.
Oh, wow.
They encourage us to connect with friends of friends, people we might barely know, and these are called weak ties.
Weak ties, okay?
Yeah.
So they're basically overloading our social circuits.
In a way, yes, our brains aren't designed to handle that many connections meaningfully. It's like drinking from a fire hose of relationships.
Yeah.
And this can lead to a bunch of problems, like stress, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed.
That makes a lot of sense. I often feel drained after spending time on social media. It's like my brain's just fried from trying to process everything.
And then it gets even more interesting.
Oh, no.
Because we've talked about dopamine and social validation, but there's another thing at play in social media.
Okay, what's that?
Outrage.
Right, outrage.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that social media can be a breeding ground for that, but how does that work psychologically?
Well, research shows that moral, emotional language, words like hate, evil, justice, spread much faster online
Okay.
and grab our attention more effectively. It's like emotional clickbait.
So our brains are wired to pay more attention to things that make us feel something.
Especially something related to morality.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, social media algorithms, they're designed to prioritize engagement. So the more outrage something generates, the more likes, shares, comments, the more it gets amplified by the platform.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It is.
The angrier the content, the more it spreads, and the more our brains get hooked on it.
You got it. And to understand this, we need to talk about a model called the MAD model.
The MAD model, what is that?
MAD stands for moralization, amplification, and division.
Okay.
It was developed by a researcher called William Brady, and it explains how online outrage actually changes our behavior.
Okay, break that down for me.
So moralization is when we frame an issue in black and white moral terms, good versus evil, right versus wrong.
Okay, gotcha.
Amplification refers to how those moralized messages get spread and amplified online through social media algorithms.
Okay.
And then division, that's the final result, increased polarization and a breakdown of civil discourse.
So social media is basically weaponizing our sense of morality.
In a way, yes. And it's scary because this outrage we experience online, it can actually become internalized. We get so used to seeing the world in these extreme terms
Oh, wow.
that it affects how we think and behave offline, too.
Wow, that is a scary thought. So we've got these platforms hijacking our dopamine systems, overloading our social circuits, and then feeding us a constant diet of outrage. It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely creates a fertile ground for manipulation and societal division.
Okay.
And sadly, we've got real-world examples to prove it, but we'll get into that a little later.
Okay, I'm ready for part two whenever you are. This is getting really interesting, and I'm definitely starting to see social media in a whole new light.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so in part one, we talked about how social media kind of messes with our brains, like the dopamine hits and the outrage cycle,
Yeah, all that stuff.
the Dunbar number thing.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. But now I want to hear about those real-world examples you mentioned. How is this actually playing out in society?
Well, one of the most alarming examples is what happened in Myanmar with the Rohingya Muslim minority.
Right. That was just horrific.
It really was, and the role that Facebook played is incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
The platform was basically used to incite violence against the Rohingya.
Oh, wow.
It ultimately contributed to a genocide.
It's hard to believe something like Facebook, which is supposed to be about connecting people,
Yeah,
could be used for something so terrible.
I know it really highlights the dark side of these platforms. You see Facebook's algorithms, the ones that decide what content we see, they were designed to prioritize engagement.
Right. The more likes and shares something gets, the more it gets amplified.
Exactly. And in Myanmar, this meant that the most extreme and divisive content, including hate speech and misinformation, was being pushed to the top of people's feeds.
For people were just seeing the worst of the worst.
Yeah, and it gets worse.
Oh, no.
Facebook also had this program called Zero Rating in Myanmar.
Zero rating. What's that?
It meant that people could access Facebook for free without using their mobile data.
Oh, so it sounds good on the surface.
Yeah, but it meant that for many people in Myanmar, Facebook became their primary source of information.
Oh, well.
So in a country with limited internet access and existing ethnic tensions, this created a perfect storm. Facebook basically became an echo chamber for hate speech and misinformation, and it just spread like wildfire.
So they were essentially giving people free access to this harmful content.
Yeah, and the UN even issued a report calling Facebook's role in the Rohingya genocide significant.
Wow.
They highlighted how the platform's algorithms and policies contributed to the spread of hate speech. It's a stark reminder of the power these companies have.
That's terrifying to think about, that something meant to connect people could be used to incite violence.
I know, it's really disturbing.
This isn't just some abstract problem. This is real-world harm.
It is, and sadly, Myanmar isn't an isolated case.
Really?
We've seen similar dynamics play out in other countries like Sri Lanka and India, and even in Western countries. Social media's ability to manipulate and distort reality has become a serious concern.
So this is happening everywhere.
Very much.
You mentioned Germany earlier. What happened there?
Oh, yeah. So there were these riots in Chemnitz that were sparked by the death of a man.
Okay.
And rumors quickly spread online that the perpetrators were refugees.
Right.
And guess which platform played a key role in spreading those rumors?
YouTube.
Bingo research suggests that YouTube's recommendation algorithm, the one that suggests what videos to watch next,
Yeah?
it played a significant role in amplifying extremist content and pushing people down these rabbit holes of misinformation.
So you could start by watching a video about a local news event and end up being fed a bunch of, far-right propaganda.
That's the danger, and it gets worse. Research suggests that YouTube's algorithm tends to push users toward right-wing content, even if they haven't shown a prior interest in it.
Wow. It's like these platforms are custom tailoring our own little echo chambers,
It's
reinforcing our existing biases.
been pushing us further apart.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just YouTube. We've seen similar patterns on Facebook with the spread of conspiracy theories like Pizzagate and QAnon. These baseless theories gain traction on these platforms, fueled by algorithms that prioritize engagement and emotional responses.
It's mind-boggling how people can fall for this stuff.
I know.
But then again, when you're constantly bombarded with this content, it must be hard to separate fact from fiction.
That's the challenge we face in the age of social media. These platforms have created a dictatorship of the like.
A dictatorship of the like.
Yeah, where the most outrageous and divisive content often rises to the top.
Wow. And real people are getting hurt in the process.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tatiana Leonso earlier.
Yeah, she's a psychologist in Brazil who gave a talk about combating homophobia in schools.
Okay.
And this far-right politician took a snippet of her talk out of context, twisted her words, made it seem like she was promoting pedophilia.
What?
This manipulated video went viral on YouTube, and Leonso became the target of intense harassment and threats.
That is awful.
Yeah, just imagine having your life turned upside down by a deliberately misleading video
Yeah.
spreading like wildfire online.
It's really scary, the power that misinformation has.
It's a chilling reminder that we can't just dismiss this as an online problem. It has real-world consequences for individuals and for society.
Yeah. So after hearing all of this, it's hard not to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
What can we do? Is there any hope for a healthier digital future? I mean, it feels like we've uncovered this whole dark side of social media.
Yeah.
We're talking about addiction manipulation, even violence.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But what can we actually do about it? Are we just supposed to delete all our accounts and like live off the grid?
Well, that's always an option.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways to have a healthier relationship with social media without, going completely off the grid.
Okay.
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
We need to understand how these platforms are designed, how they're trying to influence our thoughts and behaviors.
So the first step is to like see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Recognize that all these things aren't just random features. They're carefully crafted to keep us hooked.
Exactly. And once you start to see those patterns, you can start to make more conscious choices about how you interact with these platforms.
So what are some practical steps that people can take?
One simple thing you can do is turn off notifications.
Yeah.
That way you're not constantly being pulled back into the app.
So you're not constantly getting those dopamine hits.
Exactly. Take back control of your attention.
Okay, I like that.
Another thing you can do is be more intentional about what you consume online. Try to diversify your information. Sources don't just rely on social media for news.
Right, so don't let your social media feed become like an echo chamber.
Exactly. Get out there and read a book, listen to a podcast.
Yeah, have a conversation with someone who has different views.
Exactly. And when you do encounter information online, be a critical thinker. Don't believe everything you read, fact check before you share anything, and be wary of emotional manipulation.
It's like being a detective online.
Yes.
Question everything. Look for evidence and don't be swayed by those like clickbait headlines.
You got it. And here's another tip I find helpful. Set time limits for yourself.
Okay.
Decide how much time you're willing to spend on social media each day and then stick to it. There are apps that can help you with this.
Okay, so treat social media like a treat, not an all-you-can-eat buffet.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of treating it differently,
Okay.
think about the relationships you have on these platforms.
Okay.
Remember the Dunbar number we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's time to do some pruning of your friend list.
So instead of trying to maintain like hundreds of superficial connections, focus on those deeper relationships with people who actually bring value to your life.
Precisely. And finally, remember that you have the power to choose if a platform is making you feel stressed or anxious or inadequate.
Yeah.
Then maybe it's time to take a break or even delete your account. Your mental well-being is more important than any social media platform.
It's easy to forget that we have a choice.
These platforms make it so easy to just keep scrolling, but we are in control.
That is a good point. I think that's a really important takeaway from this whole conversation.
Yeah.
Social media can be a powerful tool,
Yes.
but it's up to us to use it wisely and protect ourselves from its harms.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been eye-opening.
Good.
It's made me think a lot about my own social media habits and how I can create a healthier relationship with these platforms. So thank you for sharing all of this with me and with our listeners.
Of course, my pleasure. And I hope our listeners will take some of these insights to heart
Yeah.
and start building those healthier digital habits.
Before we wrap up, I'm curious about something.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the individual impacts, but what about the bigger picture? What does all this mean for society as a whole?
That's a great question, and it's a big one. It's hard to say for sure what the long-term impact of social media will be on society, but I think it's safe to say that it's already having a profound effect. We're seeing increased polarization, a decline in civil discourse, the spread of misinformation at an alarming rate.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if these platforms are designed to keep us hooked no matter what, even if it means exploiting our vulnerabilities.
Right.
Amplifying the most divisive content, can they really coexist with a healthy and informed democracy?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's one that I hope our listeners will continue to ponder
Yeah.
even after this deep dive is over.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with that final thought to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex and often unsettling world of social media. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.